You ever look around at the world or maybe even your own community and just think, wow, this is a mess? Well, get ready. We're about to crack open a 2,000-year-old emergency letter that was written to a group of people who were, frankly, falling apart at the seams. And the problems they were dealing with? Celebrity worship, bitter divisions, sexual chaos, spiritual arrogance. It all sounds like it was ripped straight from today's headlines.
So to really get what was going on, you have to understand the city. And maybe the best way to do that is with this little piece of ancient slang. See, across the whole Roman Empire, if you wanted to say someone was living a wild, debauched, completely out of control life, you wouldn't just call them immoral. You'd say they were Corinthianizing.
And yeah, there was a reason for that. Corinth was an absolute boom town. It was a major Roman colony, perfectly located with two huge seaports, so it basically controlled all the trade going east and west. It was incredibly wealthy, super diverse, and home to the famous Isthmian Games, which were second only to the Olympics. But it was also notorious for its anything-goes attitude, especially the Temple of Aphrodite, which was infamous for its thousands of temple prostitutes. It was a city of new money, raw ambition, and let's just say, very flexible morals.
So, right into the middle of this high-octane city, the Apostle Paul plants a church. And this wasn't some elite social club. No, it was this messy, beautiful mix of dock workers, freed slaves, artisans, and just a few wealthy patrons. But a couple of years after Paul leaves, he starts getting these really disturbing reports. We're talking lawsuits, sexual scandals, people showing off their spiritual experiences, and these deep, bitter divisions. The community wasn't just struggling, it was in a full-blown crisis.
All right, so let's jump in. Here's our roadmap for how we're going to break down Paul's urgent response. He has to tackle one massive problem after another, but as we're about to see, he connects every single one of his solutions back to one single powerful, world-changing event.
Okay, so the very first fire Paul has to put out is division. The Corinthian church had basically splintered into factions. It was like they turned their spiritual community into a high school popularity contest, and everyone was freaking out about their status.
You had people lining up behind their favorite leaders. There was Team Paul, the rugged founder. Then there was Team Apollos, the smart, eloquent speaker. And of course, Team Peter, the original disciple with the direct line to Jesus. They were basically spiritual groupies, defining themselves by who they followed and looking down on everyone else. Even the I Follow Christ group was acting like a kind of super spiritual clique, judging all the other teams.
And Paul's response to this is just brilliant. He doesn't just tell them to get along. He goes right to the root of the problem and completely flips their entire value system on its head. He says, you guys are thinking like Corinth, like the world, which is all about power and status and celebrity. But the center of the Christian faith, the very logo of their movement, is a cross, an instrument of torture and public shame. Paul says God's real power and wisdom are found in the shocking foolishness of a crucified Messiah.
So the big takeaway for them was this. Look, leaders like me and Apollos, we're just servants. We're gardeners planting and watering. The one who actually matters, the one who makes anything grow, is God. Your unity isn't found in your favorite teacher, it's found in Jesus, the one who was crucified for all of you, which kind of erases all those worldly status games.
But believe it or not, the divisions? That was just the tip of the iceberg. The next report Paul got was, wow. It was a true scandal, even by Corinthian standards. It seems the church took this beautiful idea of freedom in Christ and twisted it into a license for a total free-for-all. I mean, get this, the behavior was just shocking. There was a man in an ongoing sexual relationship with his stepmother, something that would make even their pagan neighbors blush. Other members were still visiting temple prostitutes. And here's the crazy part, the church wasn't grieving this. They were proud of how tolerant they were, saying things like, all things are lawful for me. They had totally warped the idea of God's grace into a permission slip to do whatever they wanted. So Paul's argument against this is, honestly, revolutionary. He brings up this idea of soma, the body. Now, this was a radical thought in a culture that often saw the physical body as a temporary prison for the soul. Paul comes in and says, no way, your body isn't irrelevant. It's not just yours to do whatever you want with. It is being redeemed by Jesus, and one day it's going to be raised from the dead, just like his was. So what you do with your physical body, it matters immensely. And this really gets to the heart of Paul's message. True Christian freedom isn't a free-for-all. It's not the freedom to indulge every desire. It's the freedom from being a slave to those desires. It's the freedom to finally love God and love your neighbor, which means every action should be filtered through the question, is this loving?
is this actually helpful for my community?
Okay, so let's keep going because this selfish mindset, it wasn't just messing up their private lives. It was creating total chaos in their weekly church gatherings. Just picture this. People are having these powerful spiritual experiences, shouting out prophecies or speaking in unknown languages, but they're all doing it at the same time. Someone stands up to teach, and they get interrupted by someone else who thinks their message is more important. It was competitive, disorderly, and totally self-centered. It was less like a worship service and more like a spiritual talent show, with everyone trying to grab the mic.
Now, to get Paul's solution, you have to understand this one powerful word he uses for church, ecclesia. And this wasn't a religious word, it was a political one. In a Greek city, the ecclesia was the assembly of citizens called out to govern the city. So for this group of mostly non-citizens, slaves, and lower-class workers being called God's governing assembly in Corinth, that was a mind-blowing elevation of their identity. They weren't just a private club, they were a public body with a unified mission.
So to fix all this chaos, Paul gives them one simple filter for every single thing they do in the gathering. Does this build up the community? Are you using your spiritual gift to serve and benefit other people, or are you just trying to make yourself look good? The whole point of the gathering isn't individual performance, it's about the collective health and growth of the entire body.
And this is the context for that famous love chapter. But listen, this is not some sweet poem for a wedding card. No, no. This is a piece of surgical steel. Paul places it right in the middle of his instructions on spiritual gifts to deliver a sharp, direct correction. He's basically saying you can prophesy and speak in tongues and have faith that moves mountains, but if you aren't motivated by patient, kind, self-giving love for each other, it is all completely worthless. You're just a clanging gong, annoying, meaningless noise. This all leads Paul to the final and honestly the most fundamental problem in the whole church, an issue that, if they didn't fix it, would cause the entire Christian faith to collapse like a house of cards. The problem of unbelief. It turns out some of the people in the church were openly saying that this whole idea of a future bodily resurrection was just absurd. I mean, in a Greek culture that saw the body as a prison for the soul, the goal was to escape the body at death. The Christian hope of getting your body back seemed like a bizarre downgrade. But Paul knows this is not some side issue. This is the absolute center of everything. So first, Paul just hits them with the historical evidence. He says the resurrection of Jesus isn't a nice story or a spiritual metaphor. It is a public, historical event. He reminds them of the tradition he'd passed on, that Jesus died, was buried, and was raised, appearing to Peter, to the disciples, and then to over 500 people at one time. And he notes, a lot of them are still alive. You can go ask them.
And this is where Paul really shows them what's at stake. He does not pull any punches here. He says if the resurrection didn't actually happen in space and time, then your faith is useless. Jesus' death meant nothing. You're all still lost in your sins, and you are the most pitiful people on earth for believing a lie. Everything, absolutely everything, hangs on this one event. And this is why the resurrection is the key to everything Paul's been saying. See, it's not just about going to heaven when you die. It's about a new creation that has already begun. Because Jesus was resurrected, their divisions are foolish. Their sexual immorality is a betrayal of the glorious future their bodies are destined for. The chaos in their worship is a failure to use their resurrection-powered gifts to build each other up. The resurrection changes everything, right here, right now.
So when you put all these pieces together, the factions, the scandals, the chaos, the unbelief, what is the great takeaway from Paul's letter to this deeply dysfunctional but also deeply loved community? What's so incredible is that in the opening lines of this letter, before he lists all their problems, Paul calls these deeply flawed people hagios, saints, or holy ones. This word didn't mean they were morally perfect. I mean, obviously they weren't. It means they were set apart by God for his special purposes. Paul isn't describing their behavior. He's reminding them of their new identity, an identity that was a gift, not something they earned.
You see, the thread that runs through this entire letter is this upside-down logic of the cross. God's wisdom is revealed in what the world calls foolish, God's power is shown in weakness, and the community God chose to be his governing assembly in the great city of Corinth wasn't a collection of the wise, the powerful, and the noble, but a messy, broken, and weak group of people.
At the end of the day, 1 Corinthians teaches us that the church has never been a museum for morally perfect people to be put on display. It has always been a hospital for broken people, a messy workshop where we are slowly healed together as we learn to see every part of our lives through the lens of the crucified and risen Jesus.
And that leaves us with a final thought, right? Paul refused to give up on this church. He saw their mess not as a sign of failure, but as a stage for God's grace and power to show up. So, if God could work so powerfully through a community like that, what does it mean for our own imperfect communities, our workplaces, and our relationships today?